Hello, my name is William, and welcome to Dragon X Dominion, a realm where dragon legends are forged in fire, honor, and forgotten worlds. I will be your narrator and guide through these epic lands. If you crave powerful stories, legendary dragons, and wars that echo through eternity, then you found your home, ladies and gentlemen. So subscribe, and claim your place among these legends.
The grand hall of the royal hatchery smelled like smoke and fresh straw. Hundreds of people crowded against the velvet ropes, craning their necks to see the raised platform where 20 dragon eggs sat in beds of hot sand. Rosie pressed her face between two adults, barely able to breathe in the crush of bodies. She was not supposed to be here. Her father had only brought her because someone needed to watch the delivery cart outside. But then the eggs started cracking. The first shell split with a sound like breaking glass. A dragon emerged, scales shimmering blue and silver in the lamplight. The crowd gasped. A duke's son rushed forward, his hand outstretched, and the dragon nuzzled against his palm. The bond formed instantly, visible as a faint glow between boy and beast. More eggs hatched. Green dragons, gold dragons, one pure white dragon that made the noble ladies weep with envy. Each time, a wealthy child stepped forward to claim their companion. Rosie watched with wide eyes, never imagining such beautiful creatures existed in the real world. 19 eggs had hatched. 19 perfect dragons had found their humans. The crowd began to disperse, satisfied with the spectacle. Rosie turned to leave, but something made her stop. One egg remained, smaller than the others, sitting alone at the platform's edge. The egg shuddered, a crack appeared, then another. The shell fell away in pieces. The dragon that emerged made several people gasp, but not with wonder. Its scales were patchy, muddy brown mixed with gray like dirty dishwater. One wing sat higher than the other, the membranes torn and uneven. Its eyes were clouded, barely open, and its jaw hung crooked to one side. Where the other dragons had chirped and preened, this one simply lay still, breathing heavily. The royal dragon keeper, Lord Brennan, walked over with a frown. He wore fine robes embroidered with golden dragons. "A defect," he announced to the remaining crowd. "Genetic failure, it happens sometimes even in the best bloodlines." He gestured to his assistant. "Take it to the cull room." The assistant approached with a large sack. Rosie did not think. She ducked under the velvet rope and ran onto the platform. Her worn shoes slapped against the polished wood. Guards shouted, but she reached the dragon first. When her hand touched the creature's scales, something happened. The clouded eyes cleared for just a moment, and Rosie felt it. Not thoughts exactly, but a feeling so strong it nearly knocked her over. Loneliness. Desperate, aching loneliness, and underneath that, a tiny spark of hope that someone, anyone, might want it. "Get that child off the platform," Lord Brennan ordered. Rosie wrapped her arms around the dragon. It was warm and rough under her hands, nothing like the smooth scales of the other dragons. "No," she said. "Young lady, that creature is diseased. It will die within a week." "He's not diseased," Rosie said, though she had no idea if that was true. "He's just different." Her father appeared, red-faced and apologizing. He was a small man who delivered grain and supplies, not someone who argued with lords. "I'm so sorry, Lord Brennan. She's never done anything like this before. Rosie, come here right now." But Rosie held on tighter. The dragon made a small sound, almost like a whimper. Its crooked jaw rested against her shoulder. "Please," Rosie said, looking up at her father. "Please, Dad, nobody wants him. They're going to kill him." "It's a dragon, not a puppy," her father said, but his voice had softened. He looked at the creature in his daughter's arms, then at Lord Brennan. "Is there any harm in letting her take it, if it's going to die anyway?" Lord Brennan considered this. The crowd was watching. Refusing a child would look cruel, even if the child was from a merchant family. "Fine," he said. "But when it dies, don't come crying to the crown for compensation, and keep it away from the other dragons. If it is diseased, we can't risk contamination." Rosie's father sighed deeply, already imagining the problems this would cause, but he nodded. "Thank you, my lord." Getting the dragon to the cart was difficult. It could barely walk, stumbling on legs that did not quite match. Rosie half carried, half dragged it while people stared and whispered. She heard their comments. Poor thing, waste of time, won't last the night. In the cart, surrounded by empty grain sacks, the dragon finally seemed to relax. It curled against Rosie, its uneven breathing gradually steadying. She stroked its patchy scales. "What are you going to call it?" her father asked as they rode through the city streets. Rosie thought about it. The dragon's scales reminded her of tallow candles, the cheap kind they used at home because they could not afford better. Not beautiful, but warm, useful in their own way. "Tallow," she said. Her father shook his head but did not argue. They rode the rest of the way in silence, the ugly dragon sleeping peacefully in a little girl's arms, unaware that it had just found the only person in the kingdom who saw past its twisted form to the desperate hope underneath. 3 weeks passed and Tallow did not die. He also did not improve. The dragon grew, but in all the wrong ways. His asymmetry worsened daily. The left wing stretched longer than the right, making him list sideways when he tried to stand. His scales never gained any shine, remaining dull and patchy like old leather. When other young dragons in the city began flying, Tallow could barely hop a few feet before crashing into the stable wall. Rosie's family lived in a modest house near the merchant district. Her father had converted the small stable behind their home into Tallow's space, though the dragon was rapidly outgrowing it. Each morning, Rosie would wake before dawn to feed him, clean his bedding, and try to exercise his wings. The other children in the neighborhood had noticed Tallow. They would gather outside the stable, pointing and laughing. Their dragons, sleek and beautiful, would perform loops in the air while their owners smirked. Tallow would watch from the ground, his clouded eyes tracking movement he could barely see. "Is that thing even a real dragon?" a boy named Victor called out one afternoon. His dragon, a magnificent emerald creature, perched on his shoulder. "Looks more like a sick lizard." Rosie ignored him, brushing Tallow's scales, but Victor would not stop. "My father says your dad wasted good money keeping that freak alive. Should have let them cull it." "Go away, Victor," Rosie said quietly. "Make me." Tallow shifted, a low rumble building in his chest. It was not quite a growl, but it was enough to make Victor's dragon hiss nervously. The emerald dragon launched into the air, and Victor stumbled backward before regaining his composure and walking away, still laughing. That night, Rosie fell ill. Fever took hold fast, leaving her shivering and sweating in her bed. Her father called for a doctor, but the man could only leave bitter medicine and advice to wait it out. Fevers either broke or they did not. Around midnight, Rosie woke to find Tallow in her room. The dragon had somehow squeezed through her window, breaking the frame in the process. Her father would be angry about that later, but right now. Tallow curled his misshapen body around Rosie's bed. The strangest thing happened. Tallow's scales, usually cool to the touch, began to warm, not burning hot but perfectly, precisely warm. The heat radiated through Rosie's blankets, through her skin, into her bones. Within an hour, her fever broke. By morning, she felt better than she had in weeks. Her father stood in the doorway, staring at the broken window frame, and the dragon curled protectively around his daughter. He said nothing, just shook his head and went to make breakfast. 2 days later, thieves came to the merchant district. They moved quietly through the streets near dawn, looking for homes with valuable goods to steal. Rosie's father stored spices and fine cloth in their cellar, items worth good money. The thieves approached from the back alley, tools ready to force open the cellar door. They made almost no sound, but Tallow woke instantly, his head snapping toward the back of the house. He made a sharp barking sound that startled Rosie awake. "What is it?" she whispered. Tallow's clouded eyes were fixed on the wall, seeing through it somehow. He barked again, louder this time. Rosie's father burst from his room, thinking Tallow was simply being disruptive. But when he opened the back door, he found 2 men running away, their tools scattered on the ground. The city guards arrived moments later, having heard Tallow's warning and caught the thieves 3 streets over. "How did he know?" Rosie's father asked, examining the cellar door. There were scratch marks where the thieves had started working. They were completely silent. Rosie looked at Tallow, understanding blooming in her mind. He sees differently, she said, not shapes, something else. She began to experiment. She would move around the house with candles, lamps, her own body heat. Tallow's clouded eyes would track each heat source perfectly, even through walls. His scales, patchy and uneven, seemed to sense temperature changes in the air around him. What looked like genetic failures were actually adaptations. Rosie started working with Tallow instead of trying to fix him. She created a harness from old leather, balancing his uneven wings with careful stitching and padding. It was not pretty, but it helped. She learned to guide him using warmth and cold rather than visual signals. She discovered he could smell emotions, reading fear and happiness through chemical changes in sweat. The bond between them deepened. Rosie stopped caring what Victor and the other children said. Tallow was different, yes, but different was not the same as broken. Then one morning, official notices appeared throughout the city. The kingdom's dragons were falling ill. Scale rot, the notices said. A disease spreading fast among the dragon population. Symptoms included dulling scales, weakness, loss of appetite. All dragon owners were instructed to report to the royal hatchery for examination. Rosie's father read the notice with growing concern. "We should take Tallow in," he said. But when they arrived at the hatchery, they found chaos. Dragons lay on blankets throughout the grand hall, their beautiful scales falling off in patches. The emerald dragon that belonged to Victor looked terrible, its color faded to sickly yellow. Even Lord Brennan's champion dragon, Meridian, was sick. The royal keepers moved between the dragons, applying treatments that did not seem to help. Lord Brennan himself looked exhausted, his fine robes wrinkled and stained. Then someone noticed Tallow. A keeper approached, frowning. "That dragon," he said, "it looks healthy." Rosie held Tallow's harness tighter. "He is healthy." Lord Brennan walked over, his eyes widening. "Impossible. Every dragon in the kingdom is infected. How is that creature still well?" "His name is Tallow," Rosie said firmly. "And I don't know why he's healthy, he just is." Lord Brennan stared at the ugly, asymmetrical dragon with its patchy scales and crooked jaw. For the first time, he looked at Tallow not with disgust, but with desperate hope. The royal hatchery had become a hospital. Dragons filled every available space, lying on silk cushions that did nothing to ease their suffering. Scales littered the floor like fallen leaves. The smell of sickness hung thick in the air. Noble families stood vigil over their dying companions, some weeping openly, others maintaining stoic faces that fooled nobody. Lord Brennan led Rosie and Tallow through the hall to a private chamber where the worst cases lay. Meridian, his own dragon, barely lifted her head when they entered. The magnificent creature that once soared above the kingdom now looked like a skeleton wrapped in diseased leather. 3 months, Lord Brennan said quietly. 3 months since the first case appeared. We have tried every treatment, consulted every expert in the kingdom. Nothing works, the disease just spreads. An elderly woman sat beside Meridian, her weathered hands moving gently over the dragon's scales. She wore simple robes, not the fine clothes of nobility. Her hair was white as snow, pulled back in a practical braid. "This is Iris," Lord Brennan said. "A scholar from the coastal provinces. She studies dragon genetics and diseases." Iris looked up, her sharp eyes moving from Rosie to Tallow. She stood slowly, approaching the ugly dragon with careful steps. "May I examine him?" she asked Rosie, not Lord Brennan. Rosie nodded. Tallow rumbled nervously but held still as Iris's hands explored his patchy scales, his uneven wings, his clouded eyes. The examination took nearly an hour. Iris said nothing, just studied every inch of Tallow's twisted body. Finally, she stepped back. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Lord Brennan, do you have access to the breeding records from this dragon's lineage?" "That creature has no lineage," Lord Brennan said. "It was a genetic mistake, nothing more." "No," Iris said firmly. "Mutations this extensive don't appear randomly. This dragon carries recessive genes, probably from wild stock that got mixed into the breeding program generations ago." She knelt beside Tallow again. His scales aren't patchy because they're diseased. They're layered differently. Multiple types of scale tissue that don't match visually but serve different functions. She pulled out a small knife and carefully scraped a tiny sample from Tallow's scales. The dragon did not even flinch. Iris examined the sample under a jeweler's magnifying glass she produced from her pocket. Scale rot attacks the protein structures in dragon scales, Iris explained. Purebred dragons have uniform scale composition, very efficient, very beautiful, but also very vulnerable to diseases that target those specific proteins. She looked at Tallow with something like admiration. This dragon's scales are a genetic mess. Multiple protein types, inconsistent structures, layers that don't match. The disease can't take hold because there's no uniform target to attack. Lord Brennan leaned forward. So he's immune. More than that, Iris said. She moved to Tallow's mouth, examining his crooked jaw. The same genetic chaos that made him immune also changed his metabolism. See this gland here? She pointed to a swollen area near Tallow's throat. Overdeveloped, it's producing compounds at 10 times the normal rate. What compounds? Rosie asked. Iris smiled. The ones that could cure scale rot in other dragons. The room went silent. Lord Brennan stood frozen, processing this information. You're saying that creature can heal the others? Potentially, Iris said. The compounds are in his breath. If he exhales directly onto infected scales, the cure should spread through the dragon's system within hours. Hope flared in Lord Brennan's eyes. He looked at Tallow, then at Rosie. We need your dragon's help. Name your price. Lands, titles, gold, anything. Rosie felt Tallow tense under her hand. She could sense his emotions through their bond. Confusion, fear, and underneath that anger. These people had wanted to kill him. They had called him a defect, a mistake. Now they needed him, and suddenly he had value. Tallow gets to choose, Rosie said quietly. It's a dragon, Lord Brennan said. It doesn't understand. He understands, Rosie interrupted, more than you think. Over the next hour, sick dragons were brought to the chamber. Their owners pleaded with Rosie, with Tallow, with anyone who would listen. Victor arrived with his emerald dragon, the creature now barely able to stand. He did not mock or laugh. He just cried, hugging his dying companion. Rosie watched the desperation, the grief, the fear. She thought about what her mother used to say before the fever took her 2 years ago. Kindness isn't about people deserving it, Rosie. It's about who you choose to be when someone doesn't. She knelt beside Tallow. I know they hurt you, she whispered. I know they wanted you dead, but look at them now. They're scared and sad just like you were when nobody wanted you. Tallow's clouded eyes turned toward her. Through their bond, Rosie felt him thinking, processing, deciding. You don't have to help them, Rosie continued. I won't make you, but I think you're better than they are. I think you can do something they couldn't. You can choose to be kind even when nobody deserves it. Tallow stood, his uneven legs straightening as much as they could. He walked toward Meridian, Lord Brennan's dragon. The noble stepped back, giving space. Tallow lowered his crooked jaw and breathed out slowly. The mist that emerged was faintly luminescent, carrying a scent like rain on stone. It settled over Meridian's diseased scales. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the rotted patches began to darken, strengthening, healing. Meridian lifted her head for the first time in weeks. Lord Brennan fell to his knees. One by one, Tallow moved through the chamber, healing the sick dragons. But he did it on his own terms. Each noble had to approach with respect. Each had to acknowledge what they had said and done. Some could not manage it, their pride too strong even as their dragons died. Others humbled themselves, apologizing to an ugly dragon they had dismissed as worthless. Victor approached last, carrying his emerald dragon in his arms. I'm sorry, the boy said, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry for everything I said. Please help him, please. Tallow looked at the dragon, then at Victor. He breathed the healing mist, and the emerald scales began to brighten. By evening, every dragon in the chamber had been treated. The cure was working. Dragons that could barely breathe were sitting up. Scales were regrowing. The kingdom's dragon population would survive. Iris approached Rosie while Tallow rested in the corner. "That dragon has the biggest heart I've ever seen," the scholar said, "in any creature, human or otherwise." But before anyone could celebrate properly, a guard rushed into the chamber, out of breath and pale. "Lord Brennan," the guard gasped, "the northern border, the granite reaches, has invaded. Their forces are advancing on Whitestone Fortress. They must have learned about the plague. Our border dragons are too sick to fight. The fortress will fall within 2 days." The Royal Council met in emergency session. Maps covered the Great Table, showing the northern border and the advancing enemy forces. Military commanders argued over strategies that all sounded like variations of the same hopeless plan. Without dragon support, Whitestone Fortress could not hold. Rosie sat in a corner of the council chamber, feeling very small. Tallow rested beside her, exhausted from healing so many dragons. Nobody had asked her to attend this meeting, but nobody had told her to leave either. "We evacuate the border settlements," one general said, pointing at the map. "Pull everyone back to the inner provinces." "That's 3,000 people," another commander countered. "Where do we put them? And what happens when the enemy claims that territory? They'll have a foothold in our kingdom." Lord Brennan looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "What about sending Tallow north? He could heal the fortress dragons." Iris shook her head. "The journey by road takes 3 days. The invasion will reach Whitestone in 2. Even if we sent him now, he would arrive too late." "Then we surrender those territories," a nobleman said quietly. "Save what we can." Rosie listened to them talk in circles. They were smart people, experienced people, but they were stuck thinking about problems the old way. They thought of Tallow as a beautiful dragon trapped in an ugly body. They did not understand that his body was not a prison. It was different, built for different purposes. She studied the map, tracing the route to Whitestone. The road wound through valleys and plains, safe for wagons but long. But north of the road, mountain passes cut through the highlands. Dangerous terrain, subject to violent winds and sudden storms. No dragon could fly those passes. Except maybe one. "The mountain route," Rosie said. The room fell silent. The adults turned to look at her, some with irritation at the interruption, others with confusion. "The mountain passes," Rosie repeated, standing up. She walked to the map, her finger tracing the highland route. "If Tallow flew through here, he could reach Whitestone in 1 day." A general laughed. "Child, those passes are impossible to fly. The wind currents would tear apart any dragon attempting it. We lose birds in those mountains." "They would tear apart a normal dragon," Rosie said. "But Tallow isn't normal." Lord Brennan frowned. "Explain." Rosie took a deep breath. "Tallow's wings are uneven, I know that. But uneven doesn't mean broken. When the wind hits him from one side, his wings respond differently. He can adjust, compensate, fly in conditions that would crash a symmetrical dragon." "That's insane," the general said. But Ira stepped forward, her eyes bright with understanding. "Actually, it makes sense. I studied his wing structure during the examination. The asymmetry creates multiple pivot points. In smooth air, he's clumsy, but in chaotic wind conditions, that asymmetry becomes an advantage. He can make adjustments no other dragon could manage." "You're proposing we risk a child and a dragon on a theory?" Lord Brennan asked. "I'm proposing we try," Rosie said. "Tallow can do this, I know he can." Her father, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up. His face was pale. "Rosie, no, those mountains are deadly. I won't lose you too." Rosie looked at her father, seeing the fear in his eyes. She thought of her mother, dead from fever because they could not afford better medicine. She thought of all the people at Whitestone Fortress, waiting for help that might never come. "Dad, 3,000 people," Rosie said softly, "and Tallow is the only one who can save them." "She's 6 years old," her father said to the council. "You can't ask this of a child." "We're not asking," Lord Brennan said. He looked directly at Rosie. "Are you volunteering?" Rosie nodded. The council argued for another hour. Iris supported the plan, explaining the physics of Talo's flight capabilities. The generals insisted it was suicide. Lord Brennan pointed out they had no better options. Rosie's father begged them to find another way. In the end, they prepared two approaches. A wagon with healing compounds would travel by road, arriving in 3 days if the fortress held that long. And Rosie and Talo would attempt the mountain passes, carrying concentrated vials of the cure that Iris had synthesized from Talo's breath samples. The preparations took hours. Iris created a specialized harness for Rosie, designed to keep her secure during violent flight. They packed the vials in padded containers. Maps were drawn showing the safest mountain routes, though safest was relative. Rosie's father helped with the harness, his hands shaking. "You're so much like your mother," he whispered, "too brave for your own good." "Mom would do this," Rosie said. "I know," her father replied. "That's what scares me." They left at dawn. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks hidden in clouds. Talo seemed to sense the importance of their mission. His crooked wings stretched wide as Rosie settled into the harness on his back. Lord Brennan approached with Meridian, now recovered enough to stand. "If you succeed, the kingdom will owe you a debt we can never fully repay." "If I succeed," Rosie said, "maybe people will stop judging dragons by how they look." The first part of the flight was easy. They crossed farmland and forests, Talo's uneven wings carrying them steadily north. But as they approached the mountains, the air changed. Wind hit them in sudden gusts, forcing Talo to adjust constantly. They entered the first pass. The wind howled between the peaks, creating currents that shifted every few seconds. Talo's asymmetrical wings tilted and turned, responding to each change. A normal dragon would have fought the wind, trying to maintain stable flight. Talo did something different. He used the chaos, letting his uneven wings catch the gusts and redirect his momentum. They dropped suddenly as a downdraft caught them. Rosie's stomach lurched, but Talo's right wing caught an updraft, spinning them sideways and then forward. They were not flying gracefully. They were tumbling through the air in controlled chaos, but they were moving forward. Hours passed. The mountains grew taller, the passes narrower. Snow began to fall. Rosie could barely feel her hands, even with thick gloves. Talo's heat-sensitive vision guided them through clouds that would have blinded any other dragon. They flew through a gap barely wider than Talo's wingspan. Rock walls blurred past on both sides. The wind tried to slam them into the stone, but Talo's crooked jaw helped him sense air pressure changes. He banked hard, his uneven wings catching the wind at different angles, threading the impossible needle between the cliffs. As sunset approached, they emerged from the last pass. Below them, Whitestone Fortress sat on a rocky plain. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and on the horizon an army approached, their war dragons visible as dark shapes against the sky. Talo descended, his landing as ungraceful as ever. He crashed into the fortress courtyard, stumbled, and fell on his side. Rosie tumbled from the harness, rolling across the ground. Soldiers rushed forward, weapons drawn. A grizzled woman in commander's armor stepped forward, staring at the exhausted dragon and the 6-year-old girl picking herself up from the dirt. "Who are you?" the commander demanded. Rosie stood, legs shaking from the flight. She pulled the vial containers from Talo's saddlebags. "I'm Rosie. This is Talo. We brought medicine for your dragons. The granite reaches is coming, and you're going to need your dragons to fight." The commander, whose name was Hayes, stared at them for a long moment. Then she started laughing. Not mockery, but the kind of laughter that comes from disbelief and desperate hope mixing together. "You flew the mountain passes?" Hayes asked. "In that dragon?" "Yes, ma'am," Rosie said. Hayes looked at the approaching army, then back at Rosie and Talo. "Well then, let's save this fortress." The dragon stable at Whitestone Fortress smelled like death. 3. Massive war dragons lay on beds of straw, their breathing shallow and labored. Scale rot had taken hold weeks ago, and without treatment from the capital, the disease had progressed far beyond what Rosie had seen in the city. Commander Hayes led Rosie and Tallow through the stable, her weathered face grim. "This is Thunder, Storm, and Boulder," she said, gesturing to each dragon in turn. "Best war-trained dragons in the Northern Territories. Now they can barely stand." Thunder, the largest of the three, managed to lift his head when they approached. His scales, once midnight blue, had faded to sickly gray. Patches of raw skin showed where scales had fallen away completely. "Will the medicine work?" Hayes asked, watching Rosie unpack the vials. "Iris said it should," Rosie replied, though her hands trembled as she opened the first container. These vials held concentrated compounds, not the gentle healing mist that Tallow breathed naturally. She had no idea if they would work fast enough. She administered the medicine to each dragon, carefully following Iris's instructions. The liquid had to be poured directly onto the infected areas and also given orally. The dragons barely protested, too weak to care. "How long?" Hayes asked. "Hours," Rosie said. "Maybe less, maybe more." Iris wasn't sure with the concentrated form. Hayes nodded grimly. She walked to the stable entrance, looking out at the darkening sky. "The granite reaches will attack at dawn. They always do. Gives them the sun at their backs, blinds the defenders." She glanced back at the sick dragons. "We need those three fighting in 8 hours." "What if they're not ready?" Rosie asked quietly. Hayes did not answer directly. Instead, she knelt beside Rosie, her voice low. "We have 200 soldiers in this fortress. Good soldiers, brave soldiers. But the granite reaches is bringing 500 men and 20 war dragons. Without Thunder, Storm, and Boulder, we last maybe an hour before the walls are breached." Rosie felt the weight of those words settle over her. 3,000 people in the border settlements depended on this fortress holding, and the fortress depended on 3 dying dragons. Tallow nudged her shoulder with his crooked jaw. Through their bond, she felt his concern, his desire to help. But he was exhausted from the mountain flight, barely able to stand himself. "Rest," Rosie told him. "You've done enough." The night crawled past. Rosie stayed in the stable, checking the war dragons every hour. The medicine was working, but slowly. Scales began to darken and strengthen. Breathing became easier, but would it be enough by dawn? Around midnight, Hayes returned. "The scouts report enemy movement. They're positioning for the attack." She paused. "The dragons are better, but they're still weak. Even if they can fly, I don't know if they can fight." Rosie stood, an idea forming. What if they didn't have to fight alone? "What do you mean?" "Tallow can't fight," Rosie said. "He's not trained and he's too tired anyway, but he can see in ways other dragons can't. Heat signatures, movement through smoke and darkness. What if he spots for your archers?" Hayes considered this. Dragon-guided archery, the enemy won't expect that. She looked at Tallow, reassessing the ugly, exhausted creature. "Can he do it?" Rosie looked at Tallow. He was swaying on his feet, his clouded eyes barely open. But through their bond, she felt his determination. He had flown impossible mountains. He had healed dying dragons. He would not quit now. "He can do it," Rosie said. Dawn came with enemy war horns. The Granite Reach's army assembled on the plain before the fortress, their dragons circling overhead. 20 magnificent creatures, all bred for war, all healthy and strong. Their scales gleamed red and black in the rising sun. On the fortress walls, soldiers took positions. Hayes stood at the center, her armor dented but polished. Beside her, Rosie sat on Tallow's back, positioned where she could see the entire battlefield. The enemy commander, visible on a massive red dragon, called out the traditional challenge. "Surrender the fortress and your lives will be spared. Resist and we will take it by force." Hayes responded with an arrow that whistled past the red dragon's head. "Come and try." The battle began. Enemy dragons swept down, breathing fire at the walls. Fortress archers fired back, but their arrows mostly missed as the dragons weaved and dodged. The enemy had the advantage of numbers and health. The fortress had only position and desperation. Then Tallow began his work. His heat-sensitive vision tracked each dragon through the smoke and chaos. He could see their body heat, predict their movements, anticipate their attacks. When he rumbled a certain way, Rosie would call out positions to Hayes. Dragon diving from northeast. Heading for the gate. Archers adjusted, firing where Tallow indicated rather than where they saw movement. Arrows found their marks. An enemy dragon screamed and pulled away, wounded. 2 dragons circling high, preparing to strafe the west wall. More arrows flew. 1 dragon fell, crashing into the plain with a bone-shaking thud. The enemy commander realized something had changed. His forces were taking losses they should not be taking. He sent his personal dragon, the massive red beast, directly at the fortress walls where Tallow perched. The red dragon was fast, built for combat, deadly. Tallow was exhausted, asymmetrical, barely able to stand. There was no contest. Except Tallow did not try to contest. When the red dragon dove, breathing a column of flame, Tallow simply fell off the wall. His uneven wings caught the air in that chaotic, tumbling way of his. He spun sideways, dropped, then caught an updraft that should not have been there but somehow was. The red dragon's fire hit the wall where Tallow had been standing. The enemy commander roared in frustration and pursued, determined to end this ugly creature that was ruining his perfect attack. Tallow tumbled through the air, dodging fire and claws through sheer unpredictability. His asymmetrical flight meant he never moved in a straight line, never did what an opponent expected. The red dragon was faster and stronger, but Tallow was chaos itself. Rosie clung to the harness, trusting Tallow completely. She saw what he was doing where he was leading the red dragon. Straight into range of the fortress's ballista, massive crossbows designed to bring down dragons. Now Hayes screamed. 3 ballista fired simultaneously. The massive bolts, guided by Tallow's positioning, struck the red dragon in rapid succession. The creature fell from the sky, crashing 20 feet from the fortress walls. Its rider leaped clear at the last moment but was immediately captured by fortress soldiers. Behind them, a triumphant roar echoed from the stable. Thunder, storm, and boulder emerged, still weak but functional. The healing compounds had worked. 3 war dragons, trained and experienced, launched into the sky. The battle turned. The Granite Reach's forces, already shaken by unexpected losses, broke completely when they saw the fortress dragons joining the fight. They had counted on the plague keeping those dragons grounded. Without that advantage, the numbers were much closer to even. By mid-morning, the enemy was in full retreat. Hayes stood on the walls, watching them flee north, back toward their own kingdom. She looked at Rosie and Tallow, both covered in soot and exhausted beyond measure. That was the craziest, most brilliant thing I've ever seen in 30 years of military service, Hayes said. Rosie slid off Tallow's back, her legs barely supporting her weight. Tallow collapsed beside her, his crooked wings folding awkwardly. She hugged his neck, feeling through their bond his relief, his pride, his bone-deep exhaustion. The fortress erupted in cheers. Soldiers crowded around, trying to see the ugly dragon and the little girl who had saved them all. Someone brought water. Someone else brought food. Rosie shared both with Tallow, too tired to do more than smile at the celebration around them. A messenger pigeon arrived from the capital that evening. Lord Brennan's message was brief. Return when able. The kingdom celebrates your victory. But Rosie and Tallow rested for 3 days before attempting the journey home. This time they took the road, riding in a wagon with Commander Hayes and an honor guard. The mountain passes had served their purpose once. There was no need to prove anything more. Along the way, word of the battle spread. Villagers lined the roads to see the hero dragon and his rider. They expected something magnificent and were confused when they saw Tallow, asymmetrical and patchy as ever. But they cheered anyway, because they understood now that heroes came in unexpected forms. The capital city transformed itself for the victory celebration. Banners hung from every building. Merchants sold small clay figurines of dragons, including rough approximations of Tallow that made Rosie laugh because they somehow managed to make him look even more lopsided than he actually was. Street performers told exaggerated versions of the battle at Whitestone, with Tallow breathing fire and performing aerial loops that the real dragon could never manage. The royal palace prepared a formal ceremony. Lord Brennan himself met Rosie and Tallow at the city gates, accompanied by every noble family in the kingdom. Meridian flew overhead, her scales gleaming again, fully recovered from the scale rot. "The kingdom owes you a debt beyond measure," Lord Brennan said formally. Then he smiled, dropping the official tone. "You and that remarkable dragon." "Of yours." Rosie curtsied awkwardly, still not used to this level of attention. Tallow just sat beside her, his crooked jaw hanging open slightly, looking utterly unimpressed by the pageantry. The ceremony took place in the same grand hall where the hatching had occurred 4 months earlier. Rosie barely recognized it. Where dragons had once hatched, now stood a platform decorated with silk and flowers. The crowd was even larger than before, packed shoulder to shoulder. Lord Brennan offered titles, lands, a noble family name. Rosie's father stood to the side, tears in his eyes, knowing this would change their lives forever. But Rosie looked at all the finery, all the offered rewards, and felt uncomfortable. This was not what she wanted. She had not saved Whitestone for glory or titles. She had done it because people needed help and Tallow could provide it. "Thank you, Lord Brennan," Rosie said carefully, "but I don't want lands or titles." The hall went silent. Nobody refused such offers. "Then what do you want?" Lord Brennan asked, genuinely curious. Rosie thought about the hatching ceremony, about the dragon that had been scheduled for culling simply because he looked different. She thought about all the possibilities that nearly died that day. "I want you to change the law," Rosie said. "No more culling hatchlings because they look wrong. Every dragon gets a chance to bond, no matter what they look like." Lord Brennan considered this. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Breeding standards had been in place for generations. Beauty and conformity had value in their eyes. But Iris stepped forward from the crowd. "The girl is right. We nearly destroyed our kingdom's greatest asset because we valued appearance over function. How many other remarkable dragons have we culled over the years?" Another voice joined in. Commander Hayes, who had traveled from Whitestone for the ceremony. "That ugly dragon saved my fortress and 3,000 lives. I'll stand with anyone who says we should stop judging by scales." More voices rose in agreement. The nobles who had humbled themselves to receive Tallow's healing, the soldiers who had fought at Whitestone, the common people who saw something inspiring in the idea that different did not mean worthless. Lord Brennan raised his hand for silence. "Very well. By royal decree, effective immediately, all dragon hatchlings will be given the opportunity to bond, before any decisions about their future are made. Furthermore, the kingdom's dragon breeding program will be reformed to value diversity of traits, not just aesthetic uniformity." The crowd erupted in applause. Rosie felt relief wash over her. This was worth more than any title. But Lord Brennan was not finished. "However, I insist you accept one thing." He gestured, and servants brought forward a beautifully crafted leather saddle and harness designed specifically for Tallow's asymmetrical body. "For your continued partnership with the kingdom, we will need brave dragons and braver riders in the years to come." Rosie accepted this gift, running her hands over the crafted leather. It was practical, useful, and showed genuine respect for Tallow's unique form. "Thank you." The celebration continued long into the night. Rosie and Tallow slipped away from the main festivities, finding a quiet corner of the palace gardens. Tallow curled up on the grass, finally able to rest properly. Rosie leaned against his side, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered. Tallow rumbled softly, a sound of contentment. Through their bond, Rosie felt his peace. He was no longer the rejected hatchling nobody wanted. He was Tallow, hero of Whitestone, healer of dragons, and friend to a girl who saw past his crooked jaw and patchy scales to the extraordinary heart underneath. 1 year later, Rosie stood in the royal hatchery again. She was 7 now, taller and more confident, though still wearing her simple merchant-class clothes. Tallow waited outside, too large to fit in the hall anymore. Today was a hatching ceremony, the first since the law changed. 20 eggs sat in beds of hot sand, just like before. But the atmosphere felt different. Families waited with nervous anticipation rather than competitive pride. The eggs began to crack. The first dragon emerged with brilliant purple scales and perfect symmetry. A merchant's daughter claimed it immediately, and Rosie smiled at the role reversal. The second dragon had golden scales, but one eye smaller than the other. A noble's son approached it without hesitation, having learned that imperfection could mean hidden strengths. More dragons hatched. Some were beautiful by traditional standards, others were not. Each found a human willing to look past appearances to find connection. The final egg cracked. A small dragon emerged, its scales pale green spotted with brown, its tail kinked at an odd angle, one wing slightly translucent. By old standards, this dragon would have been culled immediately. A small boy approached slowly. He was maybe 5 years old, thin and nervous. "Is that one sick?" he asked Rosie, who had been invited as an honored guest. "No," Rosie said, "just different." "Different how?" Rosie knelt beside the boy. "See those spots? Those might help it blend into forests better than a pure green dragon. And that kinked tail could make it turn faster than straight-tailed dragons. You won't know what makes it special until you spend time with it." The boy reached out tentatively. The dragon nuzzled against his hand, and the bond formed, that familiar glow connecting human and dragon. "What will you name it?" Rosie asked. The boy thought for a moment, looking at the spotted scales. "Pebbles," he said, "like the rocks in my garden at home." Rosie watched the boy lead his dragon away, both of them already inseparable. She thought about how close the kingdom had come to losing something precious because they confused beauty with value, perfection with worth. Outside, Tallow waited patiently. He had grown larger over the year, though he would never be as big as war-trained dragons. His scales remained patchy, his wings asymmetrical, his jaw crooked. He was still, objectively speaking, the ugliest dragon in the kingdom. He was also the most famous, the most beloved, and the one who had changed everything. Rosie climbed onto his back, settling into the custom saddle that fit his unique form perfectly. They had work to do today. Iris had asked them to visit the coastal provinces to study wild dragon populations, looking for genetic diversity that had been lost in centuries of selective breeding. As they flew over the city, people waved and called out greetings. Children pointed at Tallow with excitement rather than mockery. Other young dragons, ones that would have been culled under the old law, flew alongside their human companions, learning that different could be powerful. The kingdom had not been ready for what a little girl and the ugliest dragon could teach them. But they had learned. They learned that compassion matters more than appearance, that choosing kindness despite being hurt is true strength, and that the most extraordinary individuals are often the ones others overlook. Rosie guided Tallow toward the mountains, the same peaks they had crossed to save Whitestone. This time, they flew them for the simple joy of it, tumbling through chaotic winds that would crash any normal dragon, but which felt like home to a creature built for beautiful chaos. Behind them, the kingdom spread out in the afternoon light, forever changed by the bond between a rejected dragon and the only girl brave enough to see his worth. And ahead lay new adventures, new discoveries, new chances to prove that heroes came in all shapes, especially the unexpected ones. Tallow roared, the sound joyful and free, echoing off the mountain peaks. Rosie laughed and held on tight as they climbed higher into the sky, ready for whatever came next, knowing that together they could face anything. Because that was what they had always done, from the very first moment when a lonely dragon and a kind girl found each other in a world that valued all the wrong things. They had shown everyone that love, loyalty, and courage mattered infinitely more than perfect scales or symmetrical wings. The kingdom had learned its lesson, and Tallow, the ugliest dragon, had become the most beautiful example of what truly mattered.